Shalom, my name is Rabbi Gail Schuster-Buskila, and today I would like to talk to you about the 12th and last Torah portion, Parashat Vayehi, in the book of Genesis. I'm very sad to see it go, but I'm also speaking about a difficult portion, and this week it is the last wishes of Jacob. There are many other ideas, but my Midrash centers on that. I'm not going to touch on my Midrash maybe as much as I used to in other videos, because I find this one is the most emotional in Genesis in some ways. Here, Jacob is worried about his quote-unquote future. What does it mean to think about his future? He has no future. He's about to die. And his last wish is to be buried in the land of his forefathers and, of course, foremothers, in other words, his ancestors, in a more general term, Avot v'imahot. And he is extremely concerned about that, and he makes Joseph promise this. Later in the portion, even Joseph makes his brothers promise this. I think that it is an astounding aspect that Abraham begins by worrying about a place to bury Sarah. Isaac doesn't have to worry about a burial place neither for himself nor for Rebecca, his wife. Jacob, because he has been taken by Joseph in the previous Torah portion, Vaigash, he has been taken out of the land of his forefathers. Not that he never stepped over a line, out of a city limit, left his tent, but the fact is that he, in his old age, was taken down to live in the land of Egypt. We'll see in the book of Exodus and onward what the implications for that are, but the implications for his death were that he did not feel that he wanted to be buried in Egypt. This was not his land. He was not happy about it, and he extracted a promise to be buried in the land of Israel. Of course, because his name was changed to Israel, originally it was other people's land. It was many people's land. But by the time he had 4 wives and tons of children, and probably tons of grandchildren by that time, sons and 1 daughter, he probably felt settled. He was rather elderly when Jacob was informed that Joseph was alive, and that Joseph was taking him and the entire family down to live in Egypt to outlive the famine. Now, it's interesting, he lived for 14 years after that journey. There were 7 good years and 7 bad years. And I believe that he probably went there in the middle of the bad years. So that means that he was living in Goshen with the family after the famine was over. Maybe he didn't have the energy as an elderly man to say, let's get up and go. I don't want to live here anymore. Maybe he still wanted to be near Joseph and Joseph's family. Maybe everyone around him said, we don't need to go there anymore. It's a terrible journey. We're safe here in Goshen. It's a hard thing to know. But at one point, he is on his deathbed. And of course, he blesses everyone, children, sons, grandchildren. And I want to look at the faces of those sons that he had to bless in one way or another in a few minutes. But the aspect of choosing and worrying about a burial place is an important aspect in this parasha. We'll begin at my Midrash website, Midrash.Harabah. And you'll see that I've titled this particular Midrash, Vayehi, promising and blessing at the end, because of course Yisrael's time to die was nearing, in chapter 47 of Genesis. I'm not going to deal with all the ideas in the parasha. I usually suggest Safaria, wonderful website where they have placed the Hebrew and the English together. Genesis 47 is where Vayehi begins at verse 28, but it goes all the way through the end of the book of Genesis. Before we go on to look at the Midrash itself, I'd like to show you this picture of Jacob. It is not a modern picture. We'll talk about it again, but I'd like you to look at this face, at the way the painter has depicted Jacob bent, obviously not vigorous, and certainly not looking forward. I'll begin this section. We're only going to look at a small part of the Midrash here in Genesis 47, verses 29 and 30. Yisrael's time to die was nearing. He called his son Joseph. He said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, place your hand under my thigh. Do mercifully and faithfully with me. Please don't let me die in Egypt. When I am with my ancestors, take me out of Egypt. Bury me in their burial place." He said, that being Joseph, "I will do as you have spoken." My Midrash here, the dying patriarch Jacob, Israel, managed to give his instructions to Joseph, his son, grown strange in a foreign land. It was a difficult request, and so easy to promise, but possible to ignore once the patriarch was dead. Did Jacob Israel think the company more congenial or holy in the burial cave of his ancestors? Why not be buried near Rachel, his beloved wife, and Joseph's mother? Why did he ask this of Joseph and not one of his other sons? In verse 21 of Genesis 48, Yisrael said to Joseph, "I am about to die. May God be with you, bring you back to the land of your ancestors." Today's discussion deals with the last wishes of Jacob. And we have Zurbarán's picture from the 1600s in Spain. And we see that we are going to be placing him in a rock-cut tomb, not in a tomb as people often picture them in Egypt, certainly of no way or the same. And so here we are going to speak a little bit about the type of tomb, rock-cut tombs. Now, this is depiction, obviously not contemporary to Jacob or Isaac or Sarah. This is supposedly the burial of Sarah. It's depicted by Gustave Doré. And Abraham is being brought up the steps after he has buried her. Now, this is probably not the way our ancestors were buried. They don't really know. We haven't got any clear evidence, but certainly she was put in this cave. Later, Abraham would be buried there. Rebecca and Isaac would be buried there. Leah, and in this parasha, Jacob is asked to be buried in the same cave. This is only an example of a rock-cut tomb in ancient Israel. This is not the cave of the Machpelah. This was a very common practice in ancient Israel. The person would be buried here, not really buried. They would be put out on a slab, and after the body had decomposed, then the bones would have been put in ossuaries. These all have been looted. There really are very few that I would imagine have certainly even ancient, like Persian, Roman, late Second Temple, but certainly we do not know what it looked like at the time of the death of Jacob. Okay, Wikipedia talks about rock-cut tombs in ancient Israel, and rock-cut cave tombs is what you're really talking about, which are not the same as modern cutting where they take slabs and they build the tomb. And of course, these come from the Canaanite period. It seemed to have lapsed apparently, but at the early Israelite tombs, they found once again, certainly in Jerusalem and Hebron, which is where this Cave of Machpelah was supposed to be, was also in the outside of Jerusalem. The use of rock-cut tombs inside, as we saw before. And you can see that this practice goes on. And at the end, they talk about the fact that the use of such tombs was generally reserved for middle and upper classes, and each typically belonged to a singular nuclear or extended family. So the fact that Jacob wanted to be buried with his ancestors is not that surprising. I've read quite a few articles on the subject of rock-cut tombs. And I like the quote here from this article by Faust and Bunowitz, which says, the issue of death throws into relief the most important cultural values by which people live their lives and evaluate their experiences. Life becomes transparent against the background of death, and fundamental social and cultural issues are revealed. They go on in this introduction to say that burials have more to do with the living than the dead. Burial expresses the feelings and attitudes of individuals, families, and communities toward the dead and death. So, if it is reported that Jacob's remains were taken by his family back to this particular cave, it meant that they gave him a very high honor after his death. They go on in this first paragraph to say, changes in burial customs therefore tell us about developments among the living, such as emerging social stratification or changes related to religion and ideology. There's many, many more that we can say about these things, but again, this is not the same as ancient Egyptian burial, and this is an honor that was given by the sons to their father at the end. Now, this is a website to sort of lighten the mood, I guess a bit, called Things to Do in Israel. And one of the things to do in Israel is to visit rock-cut tombs. Now, there are different types. These are rocks, but they're slabs that are placed in, this is a modern cemetery, where to the right here is an more ancient tomb, and they are, as well as they are found all over Judea, the ancient sites of where the patriarchs were supposed to live, and they do not look like these modern graves. They look more like the grave we saw before. You see these different kinds of rock-cut tombs, and that is again what we talked about before, that these were burial chambers, and there were ossuaries for secondary burial. Okay, we don't know exactly how these things worked, but this was the manner of our burial as opposed to what happened in Egypt, and we know so much more about Egypt. Just to lighten the mood a bit, I would like to suggest this website. I'll leave a link at the bottom, as well as a link to the whole Midrash. And I want to tell you how wonderful it is. It is an amazing web tour. I'll show it to you for a second. I won't be able to talk. I tried to do it and it just doesn't work. I have to show it to you. I saw it when it was in the Frick. It is now back. Zurbarán's Jacob and his 12 sons painting from Auckland Castle in Durham in Britain. And here we go. That's Benjamin. And here's our Jacob. The size of these paintings is amazing. I also like the description. We've looked at him before, but this is really the end of his life, where he really wants to have his wishes carried out by his sons. Even though this was a difficult topic to deal with, death and burial, I hope that you got something out of this little introduction to my Midrash. As always, the link to the Midrash website is listed below the video. And I hope you all, Ad 120, till 120, have health and good life. And Shabbat Shalom, Parashat Vayehi.